Hi, Travis Childs, Director of Education at the History Museum and your St. Joseph County historian here at Oliver Plant number 2. We've started off this year celebrating the 125 years since Mr. and Mrs. Oliver moved into their home, Cobb's home, in the 808 West Washington Street neighborhood. Behind me are some buildings that, believe it or not, are still left from the Oliver Company. They weren't always here, of course. We had plant 1. We visited the first plant, the main plant, last time. But this is plant number 2. They were expanding the plant right after World War I, and Mr. Oliver decided that he wanted to try to extend his tractor line, trying to make and enter into a field that was just at the very beginning for tractors and farmers to be able to use internal combustion engines to pull plows and other implements through their fields instead of having an animal do it. So by January of 1920, Mr. Oliver announced to the city that he was planning on building a second plant right here in South Bend, only a few blocks from plant number 1. They just titled it plant number 2. H.G. Chrisman got the contract to build these buildings. They started building right in the winter of 1920 in January. And they put up this odd-looking building that belongs now to Steel Warehouse and another building that belongs to Lock, Joint, and Tube. And there's a third building that they put up that is left that is now the Icebox skating rink. Now, Mr. Oliver had the intent on making pull-behind tractor plows at this second plant. So they made all kinds of tractor plows, double bottom, triple bottom, for big ones that could not be pulled by animal, but could be pulled by tractors. So that's what this plant was mainly used for. It was another foundry steelworking plant. Mr. Oliver told the city that he foresaw having to actually hire 2,500 new employees to operate plant number 2. So along with that, he was building and announced he was going to build 1,000 new homes all around this area north of Sample Street and on the southwest side here for these new workers coming into town to work at plant number 2. He never really hit the 2,500 mark, but he got close. And they produced all kinds of different things here. Eventually, in the 30s and 40s, especially after the Oliver Company had bought out the other farm equipment manufacturers, and they started making actual Oliver-named tractors, most of the tractors were built out in Charles City, Iowa. However, there were 2 or 3 models that were actually built down here at plant number 2. Super 99s were built here, 990s, some 440s, and possibly some Super 44s. All of those tractors were very popular. You still see some around. In fact, a lot of Super 99s and 990s have their build plate or their serial number plate that has South Bend, Indiana on it because it was built in these plants. Eventually, the Oliver Company transferred all of the tractor building out to Charles City, Iowa. Then they started building transmissions for the tractors, building them here at plant number 2, and then shipping them out to Charles City, Iowa to be installed. Plant number 1 is still making tillage equipment, all kinds of tillage equipment. But plant number 2 kind of foundered along, tried to fill in places that plant number 1 could not fill because of they were landlocked where they were at. Mr. Oliver had a rail line that brought raw products in, took finished products out. A lot of this land, Mr. Oliver and J.D. and James Oliver had because they used this as their farm. He had a lot of land east of Walnut Street, and he used this area to not only test some of his tractors and plows and see how they would do, but when Mr. Oliver, James, and J.D. Opened up the Oliver Hotel, the hotel had a kitchen, of course. So James Oliver dedicated a large set of acreage down here to plant and harvest vegetables for the kitchen at the Oliver Hotel. He also had a horse barn down here that was really large, but this was all their land they had bought on the southwest side, of South Bend. But plant number 2, mainly transmission, some tractor models, not very many, not long. If you have one of those Oliver tractors that has the nameplate that says South Bend, hold on to it because it's rare. They just did not build as many as Charles City, Iowa had built. Eventually, though, by the 1950s, the plant is in trouble. They are not owned by anybody in the Oliver family any further. They are run by a group of management teams that are out of Chicago. And the facilities down here at Plant 2 and Plant 1 started to deteriorate. There wasn't the demand for tractors, tillage equipment like there was, and there was a lot of producers, a lot of different equipment producers. Eventually, though, by 1958, they closed Plant number 2 down here. And so came the end of Plant number 2, the extension of Plant number 1 of the Oliver Company. 2 years later, White Farm Equipment would come in and actually buy the Oliver Company. And that, of course, lasted until about the mid-1970s. And the last tractor, Oliver named tractor, coming off the line out of Charles City. These buildings were vacant and off and on, had residents, rental people in there, businesses in there off and on. But now Lock Joint and Tube and Steel Warehouse use them for warehousing space to have all of those big pieces of piping and sheet metal and everything else, and that's what they warehouse and drive around and deliver. So at least these buildings are being used, and in this video you'll see what they originally looked like soon after they were built. It only took Chrisman about a year or so to build. Luckily, Mr. Oliver, J.D. Oliver, foresaw them building another plant and already had city water and city sewage come out here. He had paid that out of his own pocket to have the city extended out here. So he was all ready to go by the time they made the decision in 1920, basically 1919. And the kind of the odd story of that was the Tribune made the announcement of the Oliver Company building Plant number 2 down here. C. Frederick Cunningham was actually the spokesperson for the company that announced it. C. Frederick Cunningham was J.D.'s son-in-law. C. Frederick Cunningham and his wife had 3 kids, the only grandchildren of J.D. and Anna Oliver. Their children are the Oliver relatives that gave us Cop's Home, the J.D. Oliver Mansion, in 1988 after their mother, Gertrude, had died in 1987. So I hope you enjoyed this time travel. Once again, don't forget, it's 125 years this year that the Oliver family moved into their home at Cop's Home, and you can come down and see us anytime. We'll see you in the next episode.